Yeah, that works.
Good morning, everybody, to day 2 of AusCERT in these streams. I'll just remind you of the obvious things that I'm told to have to remind you every time. Remember to put your mobile phone on silent and use the AusCERT conference app to rate the different sessions. Now, for this session, we have Stephen Ginty from Risk IQ talking about interesting stuff that you can discover on the web. So please welcome Stephen.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you coming out to listen to this talk. As Vladimir just said, we're going to talk about interesting stuff right now. The focus of this talk is how we can use global internet data to improve our cyber investigations. So there's a lot of information available to us as investigators. How do we make sure we use the correct methodologies to inform our investigations and better protect our organizations? So at Risk IQ, we like to talk about threat hunting. So leveraging those relationships, we can go from a malicious command and control domain. We can find additional infrastructure that the actor may own, and we can understand better who's targeting our organizations. I like to talk about threat infrastructure analysis. And all this is a research process that allows you to bring context to your incidents. The reason it works is the same way that we, as businesses or organizations, have to interact with the web on a daily basis to provide our services. Actors have to interact with the core components of the internet in order to effectively conduct an attack campaign. Some of those actors make a lot of impressions in core internet datasets. Others have stronger operational security. But at the end of the day, they leave behind breadcrumbs that we as investigators can use to inform our incident response. So why is this important? As organizations, you are your best intelligence source. So if you take something you know of an organization in your organization that's targeting you, you can take that one piece of information and you can create a whole bunch of threat intelligence based off of, say, a single command and control domain within a piece of malware. The reason this is effective is most of the time, attacks that target your organization target you more than once. So if you're a target of a specific actor group, they're not going to stop after the first attack. They're going to consistently come back and target you. So if you do this process effectively, you can essentially get an understanding of that actor's infrastructure and hopefully proactively block that infrastructure, or on the reverse, understand the scope of the attack campaign and start to monitor for that infrastructure internally and maybe find new infections within your organization. It also allows you to bring kind of context. So there's a lot of information available. Historical context and TTPs that people have published allow you to respond to an incident a lot more effectively. So by understanding who may be targeting you, you can respond better. And finally, it allows you to identify gaps within your organization. So as you're responding to an incident and you identify an actor's infrastructure, you may find additional infections that you didn't previously know about. Those things weren't alerted on in your organization. And therefore, it's a gap within your collection or your intelligence, and you need to address that going forward. So what data do we use to do this process? We break this out into two areas: traditional data sets, tried and true methodologies, and web crawling data. The traditional data sets would be passive DNS. So you have an attack in your organization, and you want to understand what is related to this command and control domain. Who is scanning my infrastructure, and is there some information in there that I can glean during my analysis? Passive DNS is just the phone book and historical record of the internet. So where did this domain previously resolve, or what IP address did this domain resolve to, and what other domains may have resolved to it? So it's this one-to-many approach. Why would we want to use passive DNS in our investigations? Domain overlap. Actors tend to use similar infrastructure when they're conducting their attack campaigns. And therefore, if we're looking at one piece of infrastructure, we can start with a domain or an IP and say, show me the entire historical record of this domain or IP. From there, we may identify additional domains owned by that actor group or a part of that attack campaign. And now we have more context where we can block those domains. From there, we can go to second-order domains and IP addresses. So it's kind of a neighborhood approach. You start with a single entity and you build out. That second order of information could provide context to your research. Do we know anything in the public realm that's previously used this infrastructure? And then finally, subdomains. If an actor has registered a domain and is using it in a targeted attack, oftentimes they'll use multiple subdomains or fully qualified domains as a part of their attack infrastructure. By understanding subdomains, we can understand the full implication of the attack infrastructure, and we can proactively block that infrastructure, but we can kind of rinse, wash, and repeat. We can go back and say, what IP addresses did those subdomains associate to, and is there any new information as a part of that? Second data set that we use a lot is who is information. As actors register domains to conduct their attack campaign, they have to provide some information to the who is system. It doesn't actually have to be valid all the time, but as humans, we're relying on laziness. I'm lazy sometimes. Actors are lazy. People registering domains are lazy, and they throw the same email address in or similar names. Or maybe they use the same phone number as they're registering domains. Each of these areas is a pivot point to provide us other domains registered using this information. On the screen, you see passivetotal.org, which is the platform that I run for RiskIQ. You also see that it's registered using domains at riskiq.net, and our CEO is named there. We can use each of those pivot points to understand all the domains that Lou's ever registered, or all the domains that RiskIQ owns. And so it provides us context to who's registered the domain and maybe additional domains that may be associated. It also gives us a little bit of information on attack timeline. So if a domain was registered yesterday and you're seeing it in attack today, that's a very quick turnaround. But oftentimes, all depending on the type of attack, an actor may register a domain 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, and that can start to give you some insight into how far back in my logs internally do I have to look. How long has this domain been alive, and how is it affecting the time slice of my investigation? And then finally, history. History comes in more from a historical research perspective, but sometimes actors register domains, and then they privacy protect them. So that we don't know who they are, and if we go back in history, we can sometimes see who may own that domain. So how do we use these traditional data sets? I've talked about correlation between them, but in a very quick scenario, we have an IP address. That IP address has multiple domains. Those domains associate to other IP addresses. We can take that information and proactively block those domains or IP addresses, or at least monitor for them within our organization as we build out this infrastructure. Additionally, with who is information, we start with some type of facet. Most of the time, who is email addresses are the most effective. We're seeing a lot of efficacy in phone numbers at this point. We can take that unique bit of information and go from one entity to many. These methodologies have been used by organizations for many years now. And they've been very effective in understanding the full scope of an attack campaign. But there's a problem. Actors understand how we as organizations defend against them, and they've changed their tactics, techniques, and procedures. They've increased their operational security. So traditional data sets like WHOIS and PDNS are still very useful to inform our investigations, but there are a lot of hurdles around them. As I said previously, an actor may privacy protect their WHOIS information. When that happens, you can't use this methodology to find additional domains or understand the people targeting you. We see a lot of actors fully segmenting their infrastructure, so there's no overlap in passive DNS. We need new data to inform our investigations. But the methodology still stands, so we need to expand our visibility. How do we expand that visibility? We do it through crawling. By crawling the internet, we can get a lot of information from actors and organizations. Technology now allows us to do this in a very effective manner, to database it, and to index that information in the same way we look at WHOIS and PDNS. And what we're really relying on here is exploiting basic human weaknesses and poor operational security. The fact that someone is going to mess up at some point, and we can use that to our advantage as defenders. So how do we do this? It starts with what's in a web page. What are we seeing when we crawl the internet, and how does that inform our investigation? Web pages have a lot of different things in them. We'll start by using passivetotal.org. This is our web page. It's fairly straightforward. But what's going on in the background? When you go to passivetotal.org, what is actually happening from an internet perspective? Well, a lot of different things are happening. When you go to passivetotal.org, we are pulling resources from other web pages. In this case, we're pulling from our parent company, RiskIQ. We're bringing in their blog information, and we're linking out to different contact information within their web page. And so our web page is made up of resources that are pulled from a third party. Most web pages nowadays are made up from resources pulled from third parties. Dependent requests. You go to passivetotal.org. We don't have many dependent requests, but we pull a custom typeset from Typekit, and you can see that we've pulled that. That's an association between my web page and Typekit. Cookies. What's being dropped to track? In this case, we use Woopra to track interactions with our web page. We also host all of our infrastructure on AWS. When you come to our web page, both of those cookies are associated with your browsing activity. Headers. How do we handle the interaction between the request that's being made from the browser and our server? This header information comes with user agent strings. It lets me know what browser you're using, maybe what operating system you're using. It gives me information that I can use to make sure that I'm displaying the page appropriately. And then response and document object model. Everything that is in the web page is pulled back in the document object model, and we can see all different parts of the code, scripts, links, and basically every interaction. This is very useful. We pull down the full document object model because web pages change all the time. And so we take a snapshot in time. What a web page looks like today may not be what the web page looks like tomorrow. And so each time we crawl a website, we grab the document object model and store it for later indexing. And then finally, SSL certificates. Is the site secured with a certificate? Is there an association? Here you see passivetotal.org, wildcarded. This is our certificate. There's a direct association with my website and this certificate. So why did I tell you all of that? There's a lot of things in a web page. How do we use that the same way that I previously walked through PDNS and WHOIS to inform an investigation? Well, an SSL certificate, very similar to WHOIS. There are details as a part of the certificate. You have to go through a certificate authority to get it, or you have to create a self-signed certificate. And we can use that the same way we use WHOIS to inform our investigation. So maybe an SSL certificate associates with multiple servers or IP addresses over its lifetime. Maybe an actor uses the same certificate to encrypt its command and control communications. There's a record between this SHA-1 and the IP address. That's a link I can use, and that's unique. If someone created a self-signed certificate, as is the case with this, maybe there's something unique in the information that they've input into the certificate that we can pivot off of and say, show me other certificates that are similar to this. So why are certificates important to your analysis? It can identify potential overlap in infrastructure. As I said, I'm lazy. I think we're all lazy. Eventually, as a part of your job, you may duplicate effort. We find that malicious actors use the same certificates across multiple pieces of infrastructure, and therefore we can track them using that certificate. Certificate may be stolen or embedded in malware, and so during your malware analysis, there could be a correlation between that malware and that certificate, which lets you identify new pieces of malware. It could include information about the registered organization. And also, as I said, self-signed certificates are often used by malicious actors. Beyond SSL certificates, we have the idea of trackers. So I showed the document object model that we pulled down. I said we index it. One of the things we index is for tracking IDs. These are things like Google Analytics codes, clicky IDs, New Relic, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. Anything that is in a web page that associates to social media or legitimate analytics on a web page, we index. You may ask why. Well, what we find is these are unique identifiers for a web page. An organization creates a tracking ID with Google Analytics because they want to understand interaction with their end users and their web page. But also, that belongs to them at that point. And so what we can do often is say, show me everywhere that PayPal.com's Google Analytics code shows up. What we find is when actors are standing up malicious infrastructure or trying to impersonate PayPal and do some credential harvesting, they copy wholesale the HTML of a PayPal login page. That login page contains that analytics code. If they don't remove that analytics code, we now have a brand new unique identifier that connects legitimate PayPal infrastructure with typo squatting or malicious infrastructure. So it allows us to use these same methodologies of one-to-many to understand actor groups. So using our same visualization, we start with the document object model. We index out trackers. That tracker correlates to a unique set of domains. Those domains may be legitimate. They may be malicious. But either way, we have a connection point that is very interesting to us as investigators that we can dive into. With SSL certificates, we start with a certificate, and that certificate has facets. It has a SHA-1. Those facets associate with other certificates. That SHA-1 associates with other IP addresses. And each of these is correlation points that we can build an investigation off of. Host pairs. As we look at links and dependent requests that come into a web page, those are unique relationships, parent-child relationships that give us information about how a web page operates, but also gives us information about maybe how an attack campaign occurred. So what we do with host pairs is we understand the relationship between a web page. You go to a page, it has links in it. Those links associate to other web pages. That page you visited is the parent. Those links, pages, are the children. Vice versa, if you're pulling information from a third party, that information in correlation is pulled in. And what we want to understand here is where are things coming from, what third-party assets are being pulled in, and what are those redirections that are interesting. And this is a little small, but what you can see is the domain that we saw, the first time we saw it associating with the parent domain, the last time we saw it, and the cause of the redirect. So is it a top-level redirect? Is it an iframe? Was it a script? Was there some CSS at play? There's all sorts of scenarios that could come into play here. And the big upside to using this type of parent-child relationship in an investigation is you can start to understand compromised websites and where they're sending maybe your employees or victims and understand the full scope of the avenue of attack. So we see this with, for cyber espionage, we see this with watering hole websites. So, victim goes to a legitimate government website, financial website. That website is compromised in some way and redirecting the user to another web page or a piece of infrastructure that's actor-owned. That page or domain allows for download of malware. If we're not looking at these relationships, we may not know where that compromise happened, what the initial infection vector was. This gives us understanding into that process. So again, taking links, sequencing data, and dependent requests, we lump that into what we call host pairs. And those host pairs give us relationships to domains, and those domains give us relationships to IPs. And it's a very rinse, wash, repeat scenario. But what we find is by combining this data with traditional data sets like passive DNS and Whois, we greatly expand our visibility into actor infrastructure and into attacks targeting our organizations. So, all well and good. I've told you that this data is useful. How is it useful in an investigation? We're going to walk through two examples. This first example is a cybercrime example that the RiskIQ research team dug into. We refer to it as MageCart. It was targeting e-commerce websites, fairly mid-tier websites. It was injecting JavaScript code into the sites at time of checkout in the cart. And so they were stealing credit card information based on this inject. You can see my sequencing data from the crawl. We have a UK website here, faber.com. I think it's a book company. I could be wrong. And what we see is the sequencing data shows us that Faber is having a top-level redirect via script to mageonline.net/js/mage.js. Seems totally legitimate. From there, we're also seeing a sequence to jquery-cdn.top. Top domains are never malicious. If we start to look at this from our traditional data set standpoint, we have that top-level website. We see that mageonline.net is the domain that it was redirecting to. We see jquery-cdn.top on the far right is also one of the domains we saw in our sequencing data. And if we start to pull information, we get a couple of IPs. We get a whois email address that gives us a couple more domains, magento-cdn.top and angular.club. And that's it. That's the extent of our visibility. But we may not understand how broad is this attack surface. If we add in sequencing data and crawl data, we start to greatly expand our visibility into the MageCart actors. So we still have faber.co.uk. And now we have 45 other domains or web pages that we're redirecting to mageonline.net. Each one of those 45 domains is a parent of mage.online.net. And now we understand that this isn't just a one-off instance. It's a much larger part of attack campaign. But we can keep going from there. We can say, show me all of those relationships for this new domain we found, angular.club. And now we see that there are 4 websites redirecting to angular.club. And the same over at jquery-cdn.top. We have 2 additional domains redirecting to that infrastructure. So by adding and layering in web crawling data over our traditional data sets, we have a lot more visibility into the MageCart attack campaign. As an organization, this is useful because if you find a scenario where an employee a system has been infected, and maybe it was infected from a legitimate website, you have the ability to understand the full extent of the attack infrastructure, but also how many sites are redirecting. How big is this? How many additional investigations am I going to have to conduct? We're going to use a different data set this time and a different attack. We're going to use the DNC. It didn't get a lot of press. 2016 cyber espionage campaign targeted the U.S. Democratic National Committee. It was attributed to a Russian group. We'll use CrowdStrike's FancyBear as the name. And as a part of that attack campaign, the command and control domains or infrastructure for the malware was encrypted. And so you couldn't see anything. But that encryption allows us to make some correlations in the attack campaign. Using traditional data doesn't give us too much. We have a couple IP addresses that were associated with that external malware. You can see that the tags that I'm showing here associated with espionage activity, Russia, CrowdStrike. If we run passive DNS, we get a handful of domains, most of them not very useful. We get this one, misdepartment.com, which was widely reported on as a part of this attack campaign as well, resolving to a single IP address. And that's it. It's a dead end. There's no other information we can gain from this analysis. If we add in web crawling data and some of our new components, we get a much larger insight into this attack campaign. As I said at the beginning, the command and control channels were encrypted. They were using a certificate to encrypt that communication. And so when we ask, show me all related certificates or SHA-1 associations to this IP address, we get a lot of certificates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different certificates that are associated with that initial infrastructure. And then when I ask for the historical associations for all IP addresses associated with that certificate, I get this cluster of additional IP addresses. If you went and looked at each of these IP addresses, you would identify that they are associated with the X-tunnel malware implant, and each of these is a different command and control channel. And so as an organization, we could take these, we could proactively block them, and now we have better coverage of an attack campaign. So to kind of wrap up, actor TTPs are evolving. We can take tried and true methodologies of linking data together to expand our knowledge of actor infrastructure. This expanded visibility provides us a new kind of lens to view our actor groups with. And it provides us as organizations, threat researchers, incident responders, the ability to have a better understanding of who's targeting our organization, but it also allows us to evolve as the actors and adversaries evolve and improve their operational security. And so by using these methodologies and data sets I just outlined, you have the capability to really create your own threat intelligence within an organization and understand who's targeting you. Once you have that baseline knowledge, you can take that information and continue to do this process, which will give you a threat feed of information and threat intelligence to proactively defend your organization with. Wouldn't be a vendor talk without a little bit of a pitch at the end. All of this data is available within the Passive Total product. That's the platform that I created along with Brandon Dixon. You can log in and register for free. Jenna passed out some cards that allow you 60-day access unrestricted to dig through the data. If you didn't get a card, Hans is at the booth. Feel free to walk over there and grab the card. When you register for an account, enter the code, and you can use the same data sets I just talked about in your own internal investigations. So that's my talk. I really appreciate the time. Are there any questions? Yep.
How do you think the service is going to change with IPv6, or does it already support IPv6?
It'll be an issue. We support some of it, but that's a massive amount of data. You can still do similar pivots. It's just the preponderance of data when you pivot is going to be much less. So it's something we're trying to address right now. But if I'm being honest, we're not looking at it too seriously because how long has IPv6 been around and how many actors are using it? Not as many. So it's something we know on the horizon we have to address. And you'll see it in some of our data sets where you can look at IPv6 addresses. But it's a smaller use case at the moment.
Hello. So a compromised website is probably in relation with with a malicious other server, but it is also in relation with maybe 10 or 12 not malicious servers. How do you manage to get out the false positives?
Sure. That's with all of this analysis, that's an issue. So you're looking at an immense amount of data. As you pull in crawling data, you're going to capture a lot of legitimate infrastructure or use cases. So in all of those use cases I showed you, I pointed out the malicious associations, but you could see Facebook and Google and Akamai and any CDN. And really how we look at that is frequency. So the likelihood that a web page is going out every day to a specific domain or multiple times a day that's legitimate is high. How many times has it connected? Duration, how long has it been associated with that page or that redirection? Those are kind of the things that I key in on as an analyst. So how often has it linked to it? And what's the time frame it linked to? If you see a link that's only been active for a day or a few days and that web page has been up for years, then that's probably something I want to key into as an analyst to investigate. So frequency with all of these data sets, not only crawling data with Whois, with PDNS, is really my biggest indicator of what I want to go investigate.
Hello? Yes, good. Given you do a lot of correlation on lots of different data types, are you actually doing any fingerprinting and correlation based on what the malicious actors are actually putting on their servers in terms of their cipher suite selection and potentially preferred cipher suite order?
So from a high-level correlation standpoint, as we do this crawling and index this information, we have a team. Everybody has data scientists now. We have data scientists. What they're looking at is each time we pull down a page, especially for phishing events, let's slice the attributes of that page into about 7 to 10 slices. Let's hash those slices, and let's compare them across our data set. So if we've trained a model to know that something is a phishing page and malicious, how close do each of those slices correlate to our known bad phishing page? And we can do with some certainty, we can tell you that, that this page that we've just seen today, we may not know it's associated with phishing, but has a 96% uniqueness to attributes in a page we do know that's associated with phishing. And so we do that correlation, and for the passive total platform, we'll tag that. We'll say this is on our blacklist, is associated with a phishing attack, and provide you that context as you're querying the platform.
I was slightly more interested in whether you're actually using those sorts of techniques to actually generate correlation between different actor groups, just to identify whether one actor might actually be the same actor playing somewhere else.
We'd love to, but the honest answer is we're not at the moment.
Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Steve for his really interesting talk.
Thank you very much, everyone.
The next session starts at 11:20, so if you want to get all the way down the other end, you've got plenty of time.